After a long pre-season, F1's finally had its first proper day of 2026 at the Australian Grand Prix, which has given some big pointers for the season opener. Ferrari and McLaren topped the two sessions in Melbourne, meaning Mercedes was never actually fastest in Friday practice, except it really was. Nobody is in any doubt that Mercedes is the class of the field. That was revealed by George Russell's impressive long-run pace. While FP2 was patchy in terms of the long-run data, it showed Mercedes having the clear advantage, with Russell able to run at a pace the rest couldn't match. And while it's difficult to draw too many conclusions, rivals publicly and privately see Mercedes as the class of the field. That's why FP1 pacesetter Charles Leclerc said Mercedes is a step ahead. That's not to say it had a perfect day though. All of the Mercedes engine cars struggled in FP1 with deployment, which Andrew Shovlin put down to configuration issues. What that means for the qualifying potential of Mercedes is unclear. You would normally expect a strong correlation between race and qualifying pace, and that is the most likely outcome given the importance of harvesting and deployment even on a single push lap. But when it comes to race day, all the signs are that Mercedes is well ahead. The biggest point of jeopardy over the Australia weekend is going to be qualifying. Even without the added complication that comes from Q1 having an extra 2 cars in it thanks to Cadillac's arrival, the list of elements that could potentially trip drivers up is extensive. Nailing the perfect lap is going to involve ensuring the battery is fully charged, the tyres are in the right window, that the speed is optimised crossing the start-finish line, that energy management is spot on, and that you've not got yourself tangled up in traffic either on your hot lap or while preparing. It's little wonder teams on Friday seem to put more focus on single lap performance than long run data, with Mercedes the only one to commit heavily to a long run. And all teams look likely to have a nervous build-up to Saturday afternoon, with FP3 the final chance to dial in not only their car setups, but their run plans, their energy deployment, tyre prep and so on. As Red Bull chief engineer Paul Monahan said, it's going to be a bit chaotic, isn't it? With running at a premium thanks to unfamiliarity with these new cars, world champion Lando Norris won't have been happy to be restricted to just 7 laps in FP1. This was the result of a transmission control issue that struck his McLaren. That lost track time contributed to his lack of pace in FP2. Although he completed a full programme and logged 29 laps, he was down in 7th and a second off pace-setting teammate Oscar Piastri. There was no specific area where Norris was losing the time as he was slipping back from turn 2 onwards. But the harvesting and deployment of electrical energy played a part, and around half of the deficit was on the straights. While Norris's disadvantage doesn't point to any fundamental problems with these cars, missing an FP1 session that Piastri described as by far the trickiest and most complicated I've ever had could still mean Norris is a little behind the 8 ball on Saturday. And with McLaren in what could be a tight battle for the front 4 rows of the grid, even a small deficit could be costly in qualifying. There are no other rookies to benchmark Red Bull's newest F1 driver Arvid Lindblad against, but he outpaced Racing Bull's teammate Liam Lawson on Friday in Melbourne and was the fastest driver from a midfield team in both practice sessions, ending FP2 8th quickest. That put him ahead of new Red Bull Racing man Isaac Hadjar too, and this was actually reminiscent of Hadjar's electric pace on his own debut weekend in Australia 12 months ago. What makes that all the more impressive is that Lindblad's FP1 had been compromised, losing half an hour to what the team called a software glitch. Racing Bull's team boss Alan Permain said Lindblad took that in his stride and wasn't phased at all, as evidenced by going 5th in FP1, then backing it up in FP2 in a car that looks like a legitimate lead midfield contender. The energy-saving demands of the 2026 engines are being seen in full effect in Melbourne. After some initial experimentation in FP1, there seemed to be reasonable convergence on the methods teams settled on to maximise charging the battery. For example, the previously epic turn 9-10 high-speed left-right combination has been sacrificed at the altar of energy management. Every car is super clipping there. The driver stays on full throttle, but the MG UK is in charging mode, so engine power drops and speed reduces by about 40 km an hour or more before the driver even lifts or gets on the brakes. That's made that corner way less challenging than before, as even though the minimum speeds aren't drastically different, they're just being coasted down to, and the car's then rolled through the corner. A similar thing is happening at the blind and awesome fast turn 6 right-hander with super clipping or even just more lifting and coasting. The upshot is that, as expected, we're seeing the 2026 cars close to their worst on push laps, hence Oscar Piastri's FP2 benchmark being 3.3 seconds slower than Charles Leclerc's from last year. In Bahrain, where recharging and deployment wasn't so taxing, the gap to 2025 was only around 2 seconds. We're going to have loads of behind the scenes insight to share about the good and the bad of F1 2026 as this season progresses, so make us your F1 Paddock Pass by checking out the Race Members Club. Now's the perfect time to explore all the exclusive extras we bring the Members Club, as you can get 90% off your first month. Just check out the link in the description. Every time it seems like Aston Martin and Honda's situation can't get worse, it does. Their Australian Grand Prix weekend is hanging by a thread, with team boss Adrian Newey revealing that 2 more battery failures in FP1 caused by a different issue with how the battery and the electronic systems are interacting means there are no spares on site in Melbourne. The only 2 batteries left are in the 2 cars, so any further problems and it's game over. After no laps at all for Fernando Alonso in FP1 and just a single unrepresentative timed one for Lance Stroll, FP2 was at least better as they managed 31 laps between them. This at least seemed to prove that Honda's countermeasures for mitigating the severe vibrations that wrecked Aston Martin's pre-season work. But there's still a big question mark over how far into the weekend the engines will run, and even if they do survive, the package is dog slow. Alonso was the fastest of the 2, 4.9 seconds off the pace. Stroll was actually outside the 107% limit in FP2, although would at least be permitted to race if that happened again in qualifying, given Alonso's shown the car can be fast enough. Alpine was one of the below-the-radar success stories of pre-season testing, seemingly near or at the front of the midfield pack. But that wasn't the case on Friday in Melbourne, with Alpine only 9th best among the teams and 2.4 seconds off the pace. Its long-run work didn't look much better either. This doesn't appear to be a case of history repeating itself with the echoes of last year, when the Alpine was fast in testing in Bahrain but struggled at most other tracks. Pierre Gasly had a frustrating Friday, referring to issues in FP1 and also stopping as a precaution understood to be related to the battery in FP2, leaving Alpine with some problems to fix that weren't identified in testing. Alpine also had a messy first session in terms of its deployment strategy, but that moved closer to the approaches taken by Mercedes and McLaren come FP2, once calibration work had been done. The positive is that Alpine is confident there should be a significant performance gain overnight. Whether that's enough to get it back to the front of the midfield pack, given the pace of Racing Bulls and Haas, is another question. With the spectacle of these new cars a massive question mark, we sent John Noble trackside on Friday, and this is what he made of a confusing experience to unpick.
Albert Park has shown both the best and potentially the worst of these 2026 cars. In the low speed sections, when I went trackside today, the cars look fantastic. They look like they're coming in quick. The drivers are attacking into the apex. You can see them sliding on the way out. All fantastic, and this is proven on the GPS traces. The final section, for example, there's very little time difference between what the cars were doing last year and what they were doing this year in first practice. The bigger issue is the high speed sections. The drivers are arriving much slower. Super clipping is pulling maybe 30 kilometers an hour, potentially even more, off the cars, and that long run from turn 6, for example. So they're arriving at the apex 30-40 kilometers slower than last year, and the turn in, it's still quick. It looks quick from the outside, but it's not what it was last year. It's not on the edge, and that speed differential is very different, and it's partly neutered the cars. If these cars had kept that power up and could be approaching turns them absolutely flat out, 330, 340 kilometers, it would be a spectacular sequence. But right now they're energy starved, and that's making things difficult to understand what the cars are doing, difficult to understand when it's a push lap, when they're recharging, when they're super clipping. So I think a lot more explanation is needed for those on the outside to watch, and this translates through to television too. No information about batteries. We don't know when a driver's pushing on a lap, when they're recharging, when they're super clipping, when they're using boost. So I think there's a lot of elements there. Some basics are there with these cars, but there's still a lot of improvements that can be made.
Although Williams was 12th in FP1 with Carlos Sainz and 15th in FP2 with Alex Albon, its performance confirmed that anything beyond elimination in Q1 on Saturday will be overachieving. While it has woeful Aston Martin and newcomer Cadillac covered comfortably, expect Alpine to leap ahead on Saturday. That said, Williams itself has gains to make, with Albon saying there's a need to build understanding of the deployment of its battery energy. Albon also described it as not the smoothest day on track after grinding to a halt with a hydraulic problem during FP1. Sainz then sat out FP2 with a suspected leak of unspecified nature. The Williams looks like a car that's losing time to wait, which will be chipped away at over the coming races on top of its other problems. However, its race pace is unclear given only Albon did one of limited value in FP2. All of that means that in qualifying, it looks like anything better than 16th place will be a win. Friday was a tale of two Cadillacs. Valtteri Bottas put the team about where it was expected to be, ahead of the limping Aston Martins, around 3.5 seconds off the pace, and just too far adrift of the back of the midfield to be sniping at anyone else over a single lap. Sergio Perez didn't even manage that. His running was limited in FP1 by a fuel system problem that Cadillac had to remove the car's battery to fix, and in FP2 he stopped on track after joining the session late, completing no laps because of a hydraulic leak. It's a continuation of the niggling problems that caused downtime for Cadillac throughout testing, and that it was optimistic it was on top of. Unsurprisingly, Perez sounded a little annoyed that it was a similar story, so Cadillac does need to clean up its running and stop this hangover from pre-season being a long one.